In Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, a new NPC is introduced into the Ravenloft 5th edition canon. Mother Luba, a halfling Vistana who leads, or led, a band of Vistani that seemed to be quite altruistic in nature and looked after people in trouble and included people outside of their group into their ranks. But Van Richten's Guide, or sometimes I say Van Richten's Guide, it's an old habit, sorry if I say Van Richten interchangeably. Van Richten's Guide isn't the first place she's mentioned. She's actually mentioned in a source book that was released about 6 months earlier called Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And in that book, it also includes a really, really cool magic item called Luba's Tarokka of Souls. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. I'd say this is probably more of a Ravenloft video than a Curse of Strahd video because the item we're talking about is pretty powerful. There's already some pretty powerful items in Curse of Strahd, and if you were to include this as well, it could potentially trivialize the experience for the players. It could trivialize the final battle with Strahd, and the less you do to make that harder for you as a DM and easier for the players, the better, because people don't really want an underwhelming campaign ending by using this magic item. I also, if you've watched one of my earlier videos, my cat interrupted me mid-video, and she's here now. Let me see if I can do this without knocking this over. She's actually on my lap. Hello, Mel. Mel? Mel, look over here. Yeah, she is. Yeah. And I hired a friend of mine to create a banner. I'll put it up here that appears on my YouTube and Twitter. I've also made it my Facebook profile picture, and she appears in it at the bottom. But depending on what device you're looking at, you might only see my head, Strahd's head, and Van Richten's head as well. So today we're going to be talking about Luba's Tarokka of Souls. When I came across this in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, I thought it was really cool. I would suggest adding this as a sort of third tier magic item. So if you continue adventures after Curse of Strahd with the same characters and maybe doing like a wider Ravenloft campaign, which is what I did with my players, adding this item can be a really cool thing to do. I will run through what it does. At a sort of high level, I'm still unsure of, with the OGL and fan content license, I'm not sure how much leeway there is in me literally reading what the item does verbatim, whether that's absolutely fine to do or whether I get in trouble for it, particularly because it's from a source book where on D&D Beyond, you'd have to pay for the item to access it or pay for the book. So I'm a little reluctant to just read it all out verbatim. So I'm just going to kind of cover the highlights and tell you what it does. But if you want to see it for yourself, you'll have to either buy Tasha's Cauldron of Everything or buy the single item on DM's Guild or whatever, or find it some other way. So it contains a little bit more lore. More lore? More lore. It contains more lore for Mother Luba and says that these cards, it's essentially a Tarokka deck of 54 cards that contain 14 souls. Ooh, spooky. The first thing it has is it has random properties, which are, because it's an artifact, this is covered in the Dungeon Master's Guide. 2 minor detrimental properties and 2 minor beneficial properties. I can't remember what 4 I rolled for randomly for my players. I do remember 2 of them. One of them is that they, either their perception or their passive perception was increased. And the other thing as well is that they lost their sense of smell, which I remember because that comes up quite often in the campaign. One of the characters will be looking at something and say, I can't smell this, can you smell this? Which is good on the player for remembering and leaning into the role play, I guess. It contains a number of spells that you can cast once a day, which reset the next dawn. They are all divination spells. They are things like comprehend languages, detect magic, locate object, and scrying, and there's a couple more. My players tend to use scrying from time to time. Ironically, and quite interesting, they use it to try and find Mother Luba. We'll talk more about Mother Luba and the lore around her later and where you might want to consider putting her in your campaign because it's kind of left open-ended in the lore. Enduring Vision, you automatically succeed Constitution saving throws made to maintain concentration on divination spells. I don't think that's come up once in my campaign. Divination spells aren't really the kinds of spells you'd use in the middle of combat anyway, where you're likely to suddenly lose concentration. So it's an easy thing to just forget about because it's unlikely that this scenario would ever come up. But it's good to know. Say if you've got to suddenly use, well, I suppose you might use Detect Magic and Detect Evil and Good and still be in battle using those, assuming they're concentration spells in the first place. Yes, they are. Both of them are. The big one is called Twist of Fate. You can impose Weal or Woe on an ally or an enemy. Weal allows that person or target or creature to have advantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws for the next hour. That's huge. Woe can impose disadvantage on attack rolls, ability checks, and saving throws for the next hour against an enemy. This is why I said don't use it during Curse of Strahd, because you imagine if someone used that during the final battle against Strahd. Bad enough that there's the icon of Ravenloft, which essentially does something similar. You don't exactly want to be, given something else that can do that as well. It could really be frustrating if they have a very underwhelming, unsatisfying final battle against the big bad of Curse of Strahd. You can use it twice in a day and then it resets next dawn. However, there is a catch. Every time you use Twist of Fate, there's a chance that one of the souls trapped in the cards escapes. There is a table you can use, and each card up in the high deck, so that's Artifact, Beast, Broken One, and so on, is tied to an enemy. Now, a few things here. I'll get to them later, actually, about I don't use the table. I tend to draw a card, and I change some of the monsters as well, because they're a bit repetitive and they're limited to the monster manual, but we'll cover all that later. Whatever happens, the soul appears. So when the soul is released, the person uses Weal and Woe, draw a high deck card, and that soul is released in a random location within 10d10 miles and terrorizes the living. And this bit is huge. Until that soul is destroyed, it has Weal, so it has advantage on everything. And both you and the original target of Twist of Fate suffer the effects of Woe. So, for example, let's say a PC chooses to cast Woe on an enemy. That PC and that enemy will have Woe on them, and somewhere this enemy will have Weal. Or worse still, riskier, is if the player who's attuned to this decides to cast Weal on an ally, and that releases a soul, then two of those people, so it could be two PCs or a PC and an NPC ally, both have Woe on them, and there's an enemy out there with Weal, so it's very, very risky. I'm quite lucky in that I only have two players, a wizard and a paladin. The wizard uses a lot of spells that call for a saving throw, and they don't do a lot of spells that require an attack roll. And that PC is attuned to the cards, and so if that PC is affected by Woe, it does affect their own saving throws to protect them from things. It does... Where are you going? Bye, Mel. So it still affects their saving throws, and it still affects ability checks as well. But at least in terms of attacking enemies, they're not hugely affected. But if you've got, say, someone who's attuned to this, who relies on a lot of attack rolls, this can be devastating for them. And if the creature appears, I'll talk more about where, the fun you can have with where the creature goes. But if it takes them a while to locate the creature, then they're going to have this permanent disadvantage on them until the soul is destroyed for a long time, potentially. Shuffling Fate. If you go 7 days without using it, your attunement to it ends, and you can't attune to it again until another creature uses Twist of Fate on you. This is incredible game design, I've got to say. It basically puts the pressure on the person to always be using it, use it within 7 days. My PC who's attuned to it has never let it run out. But there have been times where there's only been a day or two left. And in fact, one time it was the day of. I reminded them, it's been nearly 7 days since you used it. It puts the pressure on them that they have to always be using this thing. And then if they do lose attunement to it, someone else has got to attune to it and then use Twist of Fate on them to cast Weal. Okay, you're not going to cast Woe, are you? And then, of course, there's the risk then of the whole soul breaking loose. And then, of course, they've got to unattune to it and reattune. So it's a bit of an admin hassle. But there's also the risk then that in order to try and reclaim access to this item, that another soul escapes. And then the last thing is there's a way to destroy the deck. Once all 14 souls have been released and destroyed, a 15th soul, a Lich, inhabits the Nether card, which only appears when the other souls are defeated. And then once that is destroyed, the Nether card vanishes and the deck becomes a normal Tarokka deck with no special property, so it loses all of its magic, I assume. In my game, I was thinking of changing it so that it's not a Lich, because I'm going to use Azalin Rex, famous Ravenloft Lich, was going to be the BBEG in my campaign, or at least this arc of the campaign. So I was considering changing it to either a Demi-Lich or a Death Tyrant, which I think both of them have a lower CL than a Lich anyway, so a little bit easier to defeat, but still a pretty powerful monster, and probably the most powerful in there. As a complete aside, and something that's quite humorous, is this magic item is possibly responsible for one of the funniest D&D Beyond comments I have ever seen. You have this magic item described that this woman had, this famed Vistana NPC had access to it, and it's got these powerful souls in it that could be released, and in order to destroy it, you've got to defeat this Lich trapped inside. And the first comment on it is, "Now that's smelly." I just find that really irrationally funny. And also ironic, given the whole lack of smell thing that we ended up having with the random properties that the artifact had. So let's talk about, I think I'm going to spend most of this video now talking about the fun you can have introducing this in a post-Strahd Ravenloft domain hopping campaign, which is what I did, and what happens with different monsters. So if a sword escapes, where does it go? It says somewhere randomly within 10d10 miles. So I misread this at first, or misinterpreted it at first, and instead of it being random and which kind of infers DM's choice, I rolled the 10d10, and I also rolled a d8 to determine which direction. You know, a 1 is north, a 2 is north. Got to do it this way because of the camera. And that was quite good fun because it kind of gave me an idea of where it would go. If the domain is closed at the time, the first time a card got released, a soul got released in my game was in Volkovnia, before Vladesk was defeated and before the zombies were gone and the borders were permanently closed. I had it bounce around and then end up somewhere, so it's still within that domain. Where it gets more interesting and complicated is what happens if the domain's borders are open. There's a lot of domains where the borders are just open, or they're open at times. I had it that if it was a domain that was quite small, for example, so say if it was a domain that was only like a few, like say 10 or 20 miles wide, you roll the 10d10, you get like 70 miles away, you could say, well, it goes out of the mists. And there's different ways you can do this. You can either do the Van Richten's Guide table where you've got the Wander in the Mists and the Domains of Ravenloft, where you do the D100 rolls to determine, does it go out of the mists and come back in again? Does it end up in another domain? And then there's the other table to roll which domain. You could do that. I ended up using in my campaign, which proved to be very handy when I ran the Sea of Sorrows, which I'll do, it's probably going to be one of my next videos. I used the old lore core map. I used this version. It's pretty detailed, so I might have it just cover the whole thing here and then you can't see my face for a few minutes. Because in the original lore, the Ravenloft was a core and sort of each domain was kind of added. So places were north, south, east, west of each other. And like I said, with the Sea of Sorrows, it makes it easier because you can get an idea of where the islands are, the geography of them, when characters are in the Sea of Sorrows and they're on a ship and they're sailing from one to the other. But also, for the purposes of this, it made it quite easy. I kind of do a sort of weird hybrid rule where I still use Van Richten's Guide rules where you can access any domain from anywhere. Like you could travel, say, for instance, from Barovia to Lemordia, even though in the core they are not bordered. But if the PCs decide to go to domains that are bordered, for example, Barovia and Forlorn, then I halve the time it takes for them to go through the mists. I thought that made sense. That way it's not limiting that they've got to go through, say if they want to go from Barovia to Lemordia, they've got to traipse through 3 or 4 different domains. They can go straight from Barovia to Lemordia, but also then that it's a little bit fairer that they can, if they are going somewhere closer, that it is a little bit quicker, and that makes sense. For story purposes, I had the map introduced to them when my players met the Weathermay Foxgrove twins, when they went to Van Richten's shop in Mordant. Because the map is based on old lore and say Barovia is a different size to how it is in 5th edition, I kind of just said it was like a rough map. Ravenloft is weird, the domains work in mysterious ways. The Van Richten and the twins have done their best to try and map the core the best they can. They think Barovia is here and it's sort of this size. They think Borka's over here, Nova Vasa, dark on, and so on and so on. But they admit that it's not quite accurate. So, and I mostly use this version. There's a version that does have borders, but I mostly used, I think, the main version that the author made. I should probably credit the author, shouldn't I? Paradoxis is their username on Reddit, with a O is a 0. So thank you to them for designing this. So yeah, sorry, I've gone a bit of a tangent here, but I just wanted to get across that, like, and I'll talk more later on about what actually happened in my game and what souls have been released so far. It opens up the possibility of monsters ending up in quite weird, interesting places, such as domains maybe you weren't going to include in your campaign, which was what happened with one of them. And in another instance, they had a pit stop in one place, and I thought they're probably never going to go there again, and then the soul happened to end up there. You don't have to do what I did with the D8 roll and to determine what direction it goes in. I think it's kind of implied that it's random, but I think a DM can say, oh, for story purposes, you might think, oh, I just want it to appear here. But you have got that option, I think, and maybe just kind of have a look and have a think about where it might end up. You might surprise yourself. Like, there was one domain I didn't think I was going to include at all, because I don't know, we had no reason to go there. And then the escaped soul went there, and I was like, oh, cool, actually, I can include this domain now, and it gave me a good reason. So I think I will now spend a bit of time just quickly talking about how it's played out in my campaign. I think 6 souls have been released so far out of the 14. They received the cards while they were in Volkovnia, so Zombie Siege Land. I'll talk more later on about how they got hold of the cards in the first place. But they got hold of it in Volkovnia, and they used it against Vladeska in the final battle against her. And this is the whole point I made earlier about trivializing. They used the woe effect on her, and then none of her attacks were landing. And then it ended up being quite an easy, trivial battle against her, which is a shame, really. But this is D&D. This is how it happens. Sometimes the dice work against you, sometimes they work against the players, right? So they used it against Vladeska just before she was defeated, and therefore just before the borders opened up. And so I had it kind of bounce around Volkovnia, and it ended up in Hatzimvis Hospital, and it was the card that was a Wraith. So I talk more about this in my Volkovnia video, which I'll do the thing where a little link appears here. It's quite a long video. If you want to skip to that bit, it's near the end, because I talk about stuff that happens after the zombie siege, pretty much wrapping up when they wrapped up Volkovnia. But yeah, they went to this Hatzimvis Hospital, and they fought the Wraith that had advantage and everything. And Wraiths, if you look at their stat block, can summon Spectres, so I had a mini Spectre army with it, just to make it even more challenging. But they managed to defeat it, and then my PC suddenly started to feel better again. So they realised, obviously they realised because it's written in the magic item, but from a roleplay and to avoid metagaming perspective, the player played it, the PC was like, oh, I suddenly feel better now that we've defeated that Wraith, like as if the disadvantage has gone away. They, after Volkovnia, returned to Barovia for a bit. I know different people, depending on how you do Domains of Dread, some people say that when you leave a Domain of Dread like Barovia and defeat Strahd, you can't return there. I have it that you can. They hadn't done the Amber Temple as part of Curse of Strahd. They actually did it afterwards. On their way back from there, the rock at Salenka Pass attacked, and they used it on the rock and drew a high deck card there. That released the Mummy, and I had to look at the core map, and it released it in Valakan. I accidentally say Valachan. Again, the whole Richten thing, I called it Valachan long before I realised it was called Valakan, so apologies if I mispronounced that constantly. That was an interesting one, because I didn't want them to go into Valakan yet. They're actually in Valakan now. This thing with the rock in Barovia was probably like a year ago out of game. But they're in Valakan now, finally. And I had it that the player felt unwell, and a few hours later they suddenly felt fine, which means to say that the Mummy was defeated off-screen. It was basically defeated by Chakuna and Chakuna's Were-Panthers and the jungle of Valakan, defeated off-screen, so they didn't need to worry about that one. After Barovia, they went to the Carnival, Mordant, and then they went to the Sea of Sorrows. Like I said, Sea of Sorrows is probably going to be one of my next upcoming videos, along with Daemonliu, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And when they arrived in the Sea of Sorrows, they saw a Kraken, because I had to throw in a Kraken, come on! They used it then, and a vampire got released in Daemonliu, Daemonliu I wasn't going to include at all, and it ended up being probably a campaign highlight, and I had tons of fun running it. I'm looking forward to doing that video. And they didn't defeat the Kraken retreated because it was weakened, so there's a Kraken just going around the Sea of Sorrows then, just with disadvantage and everything. So I kind of said that ironically, even though they released this vampire in Demonia, which caused a bit of chaos, the Kraken in Sea of Sorrows was less active, so they went to one of the islands in Sea of Sorrows and somebody said, oh yeah, there was a Kraken, but the Kraken seems to be less active now because the Kraken was obviously weakened. So that was quite interesting. So that was the third soul, and it took them a while to go to, they did some Sea of Sorrows, they carried on the Sea of Sorrows. It took them a little while until news reached them that there was this strong vampire in Demonio. And then they went to Demonio and defeated that, and then returned to the Sea of Sorrows later. After the Sea of Sorrows, they did go back to Falkovnia for a bit to just check in, and they were curious to know if another zombie siege would happen, even though Flodeska was defeated. And a Skull Lord appeared, who was one of Azalin's. I've done a lot of stuff to kind of hint at Darkon being this very dangerous place, and it's going to be where the final battle is. This Skull Lord wanders in, it's like saying, oh, I don't like the new leaders of, or wannabe leaders of Darkon, and I miss the old guy, who was obviously Azalin. And during the Skull Lord battle, they again unlock a character, but I think I rolled really low on the 10v10, and it ended up that it was only like 10 miles away, or probably just a little bit over. And so it was still in Falkovnia, and it was just a Deathlock as well. The Deathlock used the Sky Self, I think it was, to try and pretend to be just this random person in Falkovnia. And I had plans that, were they going to try and take over for Lakar? Were they going to, the Carnival arrived as well in just outside Lakar in Falkovnia, and like, would it try and, maybe challenge Isolde and try and get Nepenthe for itself? The players very cleverly, I don't know if I've been true to the rules here, but they decided to use scrying. I was like, oh, can you use scrying on like a target if you don't know who the target is? And I kind of thought, yeah, I'll allow it. And they managed to find out that, oh, it's actually in Lakar. And then they tracked it down, defeated it, and so be it. When they went back to the Sea of Sorrows, they fought a Sea Serpent and released this was one of the ones I changed, and I think I changed the Deathlock as well. Sorry, I'll get later on, I'll explain that I changed some of the, what's proposed in the magic item. I changed the monsters in them, and I changed the Deathlock, and I changed another one to be a Bone Naga. The Bone Naga appeared in the island of Blaustein in the Sea of Sorrows, and I had that be defeated off screen as well. But shortly after the Sea Serpent battle, they fought Pietro van Ries, the Dark Lord of the Sea of Sorrows, and again used it and released a Mummy Lord in Markovia. And they'd been to Markovia in the past, just a brief pit stop, and so they learned that there was this strong monster in Markovia, and they had to go back to Markovia. And hilariously, I'll talk more about this if I do a Markovia video. I had two maps prepared for Markovia, based on the Neither Man Nor Beast original module. I had the Markov Estate and the Monastery. And the Monastery, I got the map all ready, just in case they went there and they didn't. So luckily, fortunately, I had a reason then to say that this Mummy Lord appeared in Markovia, was drawn to the Table of Life in the Monastery in Markovia, and I was able to reuse that map again, which is great. So that prep didn't go to waste, and it was really weird how like a year and a half later, I was revisiting this old map that I made, got ready, and adding a Mummy Lord to it. So that was quite cool. So those are the 6 souls that got released. So they've got like another 8 souls plus the final soul in there. They also, I talked more about this in the Falkovnia video, Bjorn Horstman, the scientist. I didn't play him in the traditional lore that he's kind of this evil mad scientist. I explained in the Falkovnia video that we'd already had a few mad scientists already. The trope had gotten a little tired, so I made Bjorn more sympathetic, more nice, more of like a friend and ally to the PCs than say, someone who's like a loyal staunch ally of Flodeska. And he's actually travelled back to them with Barovia, and he's in their base in Barovia. And I had this idea that he essentially creates this mini demi-plane, a bit like a Mordenkainen's Magnificent Mansion, where if the players want to, they can go in there and purposefully draw the evil soul cards and fight them in this mini demi-plane where they then appear straight away and can't escape. So I thought that was a cool idea. Another thing I did as well was when the Horseman card was drawn, that introduced the Rider's Bridge. I might talk about this in another video, but I think there's a great PhD&D video about the Rider's Bridge, where the Rider's Bridge is essentially like a mini pocket domain similar to the Carnival, where like it can just appear. And now there's a 1 in 10 chance whenever they cross a bridge that it'll change into the Rider's Bridge, and a Dullahan appears, the Headless Horseman. And it's happened twice to them now. The first time was in Barovia, and then the second time, I think they were in Valakan, when they first arrived in Valakan. And so now they're paranoid. Anytime they come to a bridge, they're like, should we walk around or use a fly spell? Or, you know, use some other means to get across. They're terrified of bridges. And the 2 times it's happened, the Dullahan, when it's been on weakened, is retreated using the Nightmare that it rides on. So they've yet to fully defeat it. But now they've realised if you take out the Nightmare straight away, and you know that thing can't retreat, and then they can defeat it properly. So that was a cool thing to introduce as well. Even though it's not really tied to the cards, I just like the idea that the Horseman card got pulled, and that was almost like, you know, that drew the Dullahan, the Headless Horseman, into the equation. Let's talk about tweaking the monsters. So I've got 2 screens either side of me here, which is why I keep kind of looking over here every now and again. And the original table, I want to say it's underwhelming. I feel quite harsh saying that. Sorry to the people who made Luba's Talk of Souls. In their defense, it's all monster manual undead, because I think a lot of D&D assumes that in order you have to have the Dungeons Master's Guide, Player's Handbook, and Monster Manual at a minimum, and then anything else is additional. So if somebody bought those 3 and just Tasha's Cauldron or everything, it'd be a bit unfair if some of the monsters were from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, or from, well, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft hadn't been released at this point, because there'd be some great monsters that'd be here. What you find is some of them are repeats. So Vampire appears twice, Vampire Spawn appears twice, Mummy appears twice, Wraith appears twice. So I changed some of them to similar challenge rating levels, just to keep it fair. So I kept the Artifact as Flame Skull, I kept the Beast as the Wraith. Broken one, oh, there's 2 Banshees as well, I believe. No, there's only 1 Banshee, but... I'd already had a couple of Banshees in the campaigns we were playing already, and I was just like, I don't want to choose another Banshee. Because they're fun when you fight them like once or twice, but I think they get a bit sort of old and predictable if you fight them lots. But that's my opinion. So I changed Broken One's Banshee to, that was a Bone Naga. I changed Darklord from Vampire to Boneclaw. Boneclaw's originally appeared in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, but it got updated in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. I thought that was quite a good sort of fit and replacement, and a similar CR. I changed one of the mummies, Don John. I changed it to a Deathlock White, which I believe also appears in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, although it's not telling me on the computer, it's telling me something else. But also updated in Mordenkainen's Monsters of the Multiverse. Executioner, I kept as Death Knight. I just want to say, the Death Knight hasn't been released yet, but a Death Knight with advantage on everything, I'm going to be freaking out when I draw that card. Just because that is going to be absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. And like, I'll genuinely be worried that that's going to end the campaign and like just kill the players. I did have a cool idea of if it gets introduced in Valakan before Jakuna's defeated, Jakuna might work with them to defeat it, which I thought would be a really cool thing, having a Dark Lord help them fight another potentially more dangerous greater evil. Could be an interesting way to go about it. Ghost, I kept as Ghost. Right, so Horseman, I changed the Mummy... No, I kept the Mummy Lord as Horseman. As I said earlier, this triggered the Rider's Bridge, and I guess if you wanted to change the Mummy Lord to Dullahan and then have that be... Or Dullahan? I don't know how it's pronounced. Have that be the card that's released, then that could be a really cool idea. Innocent was originally a Ghost. I didn't want a second Ghost, so I changed that to a Deathlock. Deathlock is Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. Marionette I kept as Mummy, and that's the one that got killed in Valakan off screen. I changed the second Wraith in Mists to an Alip, which I've not introduced yet, but I've always wanted to do it. It looks, the design and the art for it is cool, the stat block looks cool, and I just think that kind of works for that one, because it looks like kind of a misty creature. Similar sort of CR to a Wraith. Raven, I changed from having it as a vampire spawn to... In fact, I changed both vampire spawns, because obviously my players have fought quite a lot of vampire spawns now, and given that you've got vampires as well, having a vampire spawn feels a bit like a bit of a weak one. So I changed both vampire spawns. I changed the Raven to a Vampiric Mind Flayer, which appears in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I think just looks really cool, and is probably the only time. I'm not going to include, if it's pronounced Bluetspur, in my campaign, so which is pretty much, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the only place where something like that would appear in the Ravenloft setting. So it would be quite a cool way to include it. Seer I kept as Vampire, and that was what got drawn in Demolio. And Tempter, instead of that vampire spawn, I chose a Shadowgast, which actually appears in Explorer's Guide to Wildermount, which is kind of like a stronger version of a Ghoul or a Ghast. And as I mentioned before, I changed the Nethercard's Lich to, I am going to change it to either a Demi-Lich or a Death Tyrant. I'm probably going to lean more towards Demi-Lich. Another minor thing I changed about these, what the item block suggests as well, is I ditched the D100 table. Instead, I decided, given that I already own a pack of Tarokka cards, it would be a lot cooler and a lot more impactful and exciting to say to the players, whenever my player who's attuned to the cards says, I'm going to use Weal or Woe on a creature and use Twist of Fate, shuffle the cards. And just dropped one on the floor. And, oh, that's a Diviner, so that one is a low deck card. Transmuter, Beggar. Let's see how long this goes on for. Miser, Thief, Berserker, Healer. They got very lucky with this. Elementalist, Bishop, Anarchist. I'm wondering if, like, that's 10 cards. I should have gotten one by now. Paladin, Merchant, Rogue, Horseman. There we go. 14 cards it took to get that. That's a very lucky. Be very lucky if it was a 1 in 14 chance to draw a card. With the D100 table, anything from between a 1 and a 14, then you draw one of the cards. Anything from 15 to a 0/0, and you don't. So it works out to like a 1 in 6 or 7 chance. But I think when you use these, it actually reduces the chance as well, because there's 14 high deck cards, 40 low deck cards. So I think it's like a 1 in 4 or 5 chance instead. I actually checked with my players as well. I said, listen, there's the magic item does this. If we do it this way, you've got less chance of things going horribly wrong. But if we do it this way, the cool way, there's more chance of it being really cool. And they were fine with it. But it was one of those things where I wanted to check the players. I didn't want to just thrust that on them, because it's a big deal. Like, there's more chance that these monsters can get released, and it can derail the campaign a little bit, because I might have had plans to say, right, after they defeat this Dark Lord, they go here, but oh no, they've released this soul, so they've got to go over here. Like adding Demonio, obviously completely derailed things when the vampire got released. But yeah, I think it's a lot cooler to do that than to just roll a D100. So if you own the cards already from like when you did the Curse of Strahd Tarokka reading, I think it's just so much more cool to draw a card and do it that way. Well, that's weird, I just drew the Horseman again. I swear I shuffled them. Anyway, so how and where should you give Luba's Tarokka Souls? Well, for those of you who've watched my other videos, I might have talked about something called, you might be familiar with something I've talked about called the second Tarokka reading. I'll lean over here so that I can do the cool thing. My players had a second Tarokka reading when they arrived in Folkovnia, which is one of their first stops after defeating Strahd in Barovia, where Vistana gave them a second Tarokka reading. Surprise, surprise. Similar to Madame Eva's Tarokka reading Curse of Strahd, where it leads them to magic items and an ally to help them to defeat Strahd. In the second Tarokka reading, they're given magic items and an ally to help them throughout all, and the locations of those items and ally are scattered throughout all the domains of Dread. There wasn't a fifth card. So in Curse of Strahd, the fifth card is Strahd's location in the castle. What I had happen was that the Vistana dropped the cards. Oh no, give me a minute to sort this out. Wait outside, please. And they left the wagon. And then when they were stood outside, the wagon disappeared in the mist, and all that was left behind was a Tarokka deck. And it was Luba's Tarokka of Souls. So that was it was gifted to them. So in addition to finding 3 more items and an ally, they were straight away given this magic item. So that was one way. It might not work for you, but I thought that was a really cool thematic way to give it to them. I'll talk more about the second Tarokka reading in the outro of this video. In terms of tying it to the lore, the cool thing about... It's kind of a blessing and a curse when there isn't much lore about an NPC that's introduced like Mother Luba. In Vanisher's Guide to Ravenloft, she's literally got a paragraph, and in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, she's also got just like a paragraph. But the cool thing is obviously we're DMs, we can add stuff, we can change stuff. And the cool thing is it's not set in stone what happened to her or where she is. In the lore for her in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, it says some years ago, Mother Luba disappeared into the mists. So she's missing. Now, is she dead? Is she captured by somebody? Is she out there somewhere, whether she has her memory of who she is or not? What I'm doing is that she's still alive. This sounds ridiculous saying it out loud. My players don't know this as well, so I really hope my players aren't watching. but she is on a random island in the Sea of Sorrows. And while, ironically, my players, every single time they go to a different domain, my player uses scrying to try and find Mother Luba, and obviously it fails because she's not in that domain, and each pocket domain, you know, and the way the mists work, it's limited to just that. But ironically, the one place they didn't do it because they just forgot was the Sea of Sorrows. So if they'd scryed on her in the Sea of Sorrows and it was successful, they would have just found her on this island. I'm playing it that she has no memory of who she was, that she was a Vistana, any of that. She's just living happy halfling life on a tropical island, doing occasional bits of fishing and, you know, other stuff, living her best life on there. The island is actually an ancient dragon turtle. I think I read in the lore for dragon turtles that as they get older, they get less aggressive and just don't want to do stuff. And given Mother Luba's nature, it's suggested that she's good and kind. This ancient dragon turtle's gotten a bond with her and is happy for her to just float around. And I did have this really cool idea where, like, they've got their own ship now. They got the Relentless from Pietro van Ries, even though it's still a ghost ship. And they've made allies and friends in Sea of Sorrows. Like I say, I'll talk more about that when I do the Sea of Sorrows video. I really like this idea. They had plans. They said to me the one time, oh, maybe we'll go back to the Sea of Sorrows one day and finally defeat that Kraken. And I really like the idea that they amassed this small army of ships. And they also they also managed to encourage Mother Luba and her ancient dragon turtle to fight it as well. I just thought that'd be really cool and really wild. But it's yet to happen. We'll see. We'll have to do a video about that if it does. I also tied it to Azalin Rex, so this will get revealed when Azalin Rex comes into it in the end game. I have big plans for that. They've already met and befriended Fran Zalhonen, who doesn't know who he was or used to be, just knows that there's this evil lich called LToS Rex that desperately wants him dead. And LToS Rex doesn't know who he used to be. But it'll get revealed that one of Azalin's schemes to try and leave the Domains of Dread for good was to use the apparatus. Again, I think I made a mistake with classic Ravenloft lore. There's the apparatus and the rift spinner. I think it's the rift spinner helps people to escape the mists, but I thought it was the apparatus. So I said it was the apparatus. Use the apparatus in conjunction with Luba's Tarokka of Souls. So he basically captured Mother Luba, and that's why she went missing. And tried to use Luba's Tarokka of Souls to try and escape the domains. It failed, splitting him in two, Fran and LToS. And Mother Luba just essentially got like teleported away as well, and that's how she ends up in the Sea of Sorrows, and it erased her memory as well, which is why Fran has no memory of who he or what he used to be as well. And so that's essentially what's going to happen. If they do find Mother Luba in the future, she's just going to be very confused. You know, she won't believe them if they say, oh, you used to be this leader of a band of people who travel the mists. I was thinking of playing her as this quite sort of quirky, chaotic, eccentric old lady halfling. Give her this diviner stat block from, that one was originally Volo's Guide to Monsters, updated in Modern Games Monsters of the Multiverse. Maybe she'll travel with them. Maybe if she sees the cards, they show her the cards, she gets some sort of flash in memory of what happened in Darkon. I'm not quite sure yet. We'll see how it goes. An interesting point I'd like to cover as well is what if you want to include these cards, but you're not running a Ravenloft campaign, which was when I posted this on Reddit. This video essentially is like a video version of a Reddit post I did a while back. Someone left a comment on there recently saying, oh, I'm thinking of introducing this, how to introduce this. And they didn't say whether or not they were doing a Ravenloft campaign. So it'd be quite interesting introducing something like this, because I believe the Vistani are kind of, I mean, you could have them appear anywhere. They're known to go to the Sword Coast and stuff like that, but they are sort of pretty much exclusively a Ravenloft Domain of Dread group of people. So if someone's running a completely different campaign and they are thinking of just having people find this random Vistani item, that for me feels a bit weird, but you know, to each their own. Truth is, I don't know. I don't know how and where you could introduce Luba's Tarokka of Souls outside of a Ravenloft campaign. Maybe you guys let me know and leave a comment. Maybe there's something in one of the old, like some of the other modules that have ties to Ravenloft that I'm not privy to. That'd be quite a cool thing to learn about, and maybe there will be other ways that we collectively as a community can say, oh yeah, if you're running Rime of the Frost Maiden, or I'm drawing a blank of all the other millions of like campaigns there are, Tomb of Annihilation or Descent into Avernus, that, you know, somehow you can introduce this deck of cards. And I think that's everything. If you like the idea of me talking about this second Tarokka reading earlier, it's on DM's Guild. It's currently free, pay what you want, value $10, so don't feel like you need to pay $10 if you don't want to or can't afford to. even just chucking a few dollars my way is appreciated. I might in the future change it so it's not pay what you want anymore and it is just $10. So if you're watching this video not long after it comes out and you are interested, feel free to grab it for free or for cheaper. So far, over 300 people have downloaded it, which blows my mind. I only know of one person who's actually said, oh, I did the draw and this is what I got. So if you do use it, even if you get it and you don't add it to your campaign, but you do a draw because you're curious, I'd love to know what locations and ally you got, because I just think I put a lot of time and effort into it. It's got, so every card, similar to Curse of Strahd, where the items line up to different locations and the ally lines up to different NPCs. There's 120 possible locations. I came up with 3 clues per card, so there's only 40 low deck cards, but I came up with 120 clues. And with the allies, there's 14 high deck cards, so 14 ally choices, but I ended up coming up with 3 per card. So you can kind of choose on the fly as well. You're doing the draw, you might think, oh, I wasn't going to include that domain, so I'll choose this domain, or I wasn't going to include that NPC, so I'll choose this NPC. And not just people who are mentioned in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, but people who appear in some of the old novels. One of them is an NPC from Death of a Dark Lord. There's at least 2 from Scholar of Decay as well. So yeah, I had a bit of fun with it, and there's a few nods to the older Ravenloft lore as well. And I think that's everything. As I mentioned a few times, I'll probably do a couple of Curse of Strahd videos. I like doing like a Curse of Strahd video, a Ravenloft video, a Curse of Strahd video, a Ravenloft video. I've got a few Curse of Strahd videos lined up, but the next 2 Ravenloft videos I'll likely do are how I ran the Sea of Sorrows and how I ran Demonio. I've previously covered off how I ran the Carnival and how I ran Folkovnia. The Folkovnia one's a beast. It's over an hour long. I'm sorry. I tend to ramble. And you know, it covers a lot. It covers everything from like pre-siege, the siege itself, and post-siege. But yeah, have a watch and have a look at the second Tarokka reading and let me know what you think. Thank you, Miss Wanderers.